I'm Brian Talley, and I'm here today with Harry Jackson. He is a concerned parent from the Fairfax, Virginia area. And from what I've read, a former PTA president of Virginia's Thomas Jefferson High School.
Oh, great. I've got my family, 3 kids. I've got a stepson who goes to Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, was the nation's #1 high school for the last 2 years in a row. I have a 14-year-old in eighth grade. She's Rachel Carson. And I have a 6-year-old, our baby, which we're homeschooling right now until we can resolve some of the issues in the education space regarding policy. My professional background, I'm a retired naval intelligence officer, graduated from the United States Naval Academy. If you're looking at my background there, that's Navy State or the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. I did 20 years in the service, retired from the Naval Reserve. I also work as an IT professional, cybersecurity. I'm currently the vice president of the Fairfax County Association for the Gifted. I'm also the chair of its diversity committee. As you mentioned before, I was the president of the Thomas Jefferson PTSA. I was the first Black president of that organization. I've been involved with the coalition for TJ regarding TJ admissions changes, which were openly racist, and that was through very much of a CRT lens, which I think we'll talk about today. Most of my life, I have been a Democrat. I was a Democrat all the way up until 2021. I made a big switch over education, and that was the big one. And particularly when I saw schools migrate over with CRT. But I'm a parent. I'm a parent, and I'm a dad, because we're seeing activists move into the K-12 space, trying to indoctrinate children through the lens of equity and equal outcomes, and not really trying to prepare children to meet their fullest potential. And honestly, they've really have done some really terrible things, particularly with special needs children. During COVID, there was a period where 30 days where they didn't offer any education to any special needs children. And we just had a superintendent who was hired based off her viewpoint in equity in North Shore. She denied education to special needs children in her district for up to a year. I mean, you're thinking about learning loss and across the communities. I mean, that's a crime. And that's something people need to really think about when you talk about this when you talk about CRT. It's not just about race. They attach other issues to it that are not necessarily onto the Black struggle. It's when you're talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity, you're talking about what they mean by equity. And I think that's when you talk about the jargon that they're being used, and they're talking about equity, they're talking about forcing equal outcomes. And that's the big issue that when we're dealing with this DIE effort, because the two are really synonymous. When you say DIE, when they're talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity, they really are talking about CRT, and they're talking about the praxis of CRT. And the four foundations of this ideology, and it's an ideology, and this is why it's so divisive. The first one, and this is what's un-American, why this causing so much resistance from the beginning, is that they believe that censorship is necessary. The second issue, what makes it attractive about it, is that they think that they say that their discrimination has agreed. In our country, we have had systematic racism. But the hubris about it, the arrogance, is that they think that only those that are specially trained can identify it. And that leads to a problem. The other issue is the third part, and this is very divisive, which I think we've made progress as a society, where it more identifies what group you belong to being more important than who a person is as their individual. And then the fourth is that, the pillar, which really causes a lot of this divisiveness, is that they believe that in order to remedy this past discrimination, you have to have present discrimination. And that's what's causing this divisiveness within our country. It's not bringing us together what we have in common. It's identifying what makes us different, and it's tearing us apart. Equity has its place, but equity should be limited. A great example of that, a state that did it well with equity, is this great state of Texas. If you're in the top 10% of your class, no matter what school you go to, you're admitted to the University of Texas. That shows grit. Grit is a huge determining factor. That is equity done right. Equity gone wrong. And I'll go back to Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. When they revised these admission standards, the admissions test through the lens of equity, they basically they made it so if you went to an advanced academic program, you had very minimal chances of getting in. And if you were Black and Hispanic, you were penalized for it. And those children are struggling now academically at the school. So in the lens of equity, to increase Black and Hispanic enrollment at the nation's #1 high school, they basically disenfranchised all the top Black and Hispanic children that they should have been trying to recruit from. And that comes down to how are you identifying what the root causes of discrimination are. And I think some people are looking at the outcomes and they're saying that's evidence of racism, but you have to look at the root cause issues. From growing up, when I grew up, I was always taught that racism is taught at home, and it really is. Anybody who's had kindergarten children, you take your kid to the playground, they're playing with kids from other races. They're not seeing race. It's being taught to them. It's being instilled into them. You're teaching other children of color that they're being oppressed, and they're not looking within themselves to how to improve themselves, but they're blaming the system for whatever failures, and it's creating a vicious cycle. And that's another part. I mean, this methodology it teaches kids to hate their country. And in my experience, from what I've seen up here, it's not been persons of color that have been self-proclaimed experts. It's mostly been people who are not of color, who are more liberal. In my case, I have the Fairfax County NAACP. It's not majority Black, despite having over 100,000 Black residents in our community. It's 95% white, and they're the ones that are speaking on behalf of the Black community. They're acting as Black revolutionaries in cosplay. They're not the Black church leaders. That's they really need to speak to community leaders in these representatives. They need to go to the Hispanic church, go to Hispanic churches. They're not for this either. They're not talking to members in the Chinese community that are fleeing the Red Revolution, that recognize signs of Marxism and communism, and they see where this is going. Transparency, that is paramount. That is key. Being transparent. Talk about what framework you are using to arrive at this solution. Frameworks tell you what's possible and how to get there. Allow it to be open to be challenged. Allow it to be open to be corrected. You'll arrive at that destination. You can state your goals, state what framework you're using, what data you're using, and get that support from the community. Don't have this to be an ideology or a belief. And I understand that people are passionate. They want to see the ills of society corrected, but there's the right way of doing it, and there's a harmful way of going about it. Is to go out and do the outreach to these communities. There are a lot of organizations and private foundations that are out there that can identify candidates. If you're a board member and you're trying to diversify your organization, start it out the right way. Start mentoring people. Go to historically Black colleges, identify candidates, bring in that crop, create those mentorships. Just by having a forced outcome, you're not going to get the right results. We've been there before in the 1970s, where they started trying to force public service with quota systems.
I've seen a variety of attacks and a lot of finger pointing, saying, if you push back against this, you are blatantly a bigot, or you're blatantly racist. And what do you say about that?
Well, I think it's a bullying tactic. The name calling, and I've been a victim of that. I mentioned before, like, I've been involved in a number of diversity efforts with FCAG, PTSA, funding for Black Student Fund. I was called it segregation. Shockingly, the people attacking me aren't persons of color. I'm not being attacked by anybody in the Black community. I'm being attacked by people who on the left side in the white community. When they talk about elements, the problem with CRT is they define whiteness as being a bad and ill, and then they start talking about attributes of whiteness, and that's the problem. Is there value in addressing inherent bias? Yeah, I'm sure some of us may have it, or we all are subject to our inherent bias. Is it appealing to have an understanding of intersectionality? Well, I think all of us could benefit from cultural awareness, right? And we're dealing with different cultures. But when you start taking into account and mixing it, now we're going to force all the equal outcomes. That's where things go wrong, because you have people of different abilities, particularly when you're excelling performers, you're tearing them down. There is a big anti-capitalist bent to it. They're not for it. They don't like capitalism. They view it as slavery. I think the end goal would be moving away from capitalist society in a lot of ways. I think they'd be fine with that. I think they'd be fine in a society where everyone is equal. Harrison Bergeron. I think that would be perfectly fine with them. But I think for ideologies, I think they're trying to transform society. I mean, there are some things that a lot of us are good human beings can agree with. We should all be treated with dignity and respect. We all think that being a racist is a moral wrong, is a moral failing on people, and this is really just it's exploiting that. And there are a lot of companies that are out there, diversity, inclusion, and equity companies, that are getting contracts and profiting off of this. Black Lives Matter. I mean, weren't they they were just under investigation for buying numerous vacation homes in the senior leadership. Ibram Kendi has gotten paid $20,000 for a 40-minute Zoom lecture. some of these people are really making some money off of this. As a leader, well, leaders are supposed to unite and not divide, and that's allowing, when they talk about diversity, that diversity is more than just a person's skin color. It's diversity of thought. They do need to make sure that they honor safe spaces for open dialogue and discussion, and freedom of speech and expression in order to challenge it. These ideas should be able to survive in the marketplace of free ideas. They should be able to be challenged and to be questioned. If you're truly trying to make a change, to have that discussion, what are the root cause issues, and then try to work within that diverse community of how do you arrive to a solution, instead of simply saying, this is the answer, deal with it. Yeah, but push back against the CRT. It is a proposed theory to deal with society's ills. It is not the end all be all. There are other solutions that are out there. We can agree that there might be systemic racism, but with this critical race theory and the practice of critical race theory, if you disagree with it, that's perfectly fine. You should not be vilified for that. They're coming after our kids, and we're as parents, we're the ones that love our children the most, and we don't necessarily have to co-parent with the government.